Hello Bookish friends, welcome to my July wrap-up part 2. In this video I will talk about 6 works that I finished and 1 book that I DNF'd in the second half of July. Like I did in my previous wrap-ups, I will insert the clips that I recorded when I very recently finished the works. So let's see which works I finished in the second half of July. Today is the 16th of July and I finished my audiobook that I was listening for about I think 10 days. I finished Sufle by Aslı Berker. I read this book because I found it on my audiobook application and saw that it had an English translation. And I will make a detailed Turkish shelf video about this book, which will certainly be online before the wrap-up video in which this clip will be included. I will link the video in the cards. In this book, we follow the lives of three people in 3 different cities, and they are really close in age, between 55 and 62. Lilia, who's living in New York, is 62 years old, and one day her husband has a stroke and has to be bedridden, and Lilia has to take care of him. During this time, she learned many things about her marriage that she was not aware of it before. Mark, who's living in Paris, is a man in his late 50s whose wife dies suddenly, and he is left with the grief of his wife, whom he loves very dearly. And during his recovery process, he learns how little he knew about his wife. And lastly, Ferda, who's a 57-year-old woman who's happily married, has 2 grown children as well as 2 granddaughters, lives in Istanbul. One day she receives a phone call from her mother's neighbor who says that her mother broke her hip bone, and after that day Ferda's life changes for the worse. Those 3 people do find solace in their kitchen, find cooking like a therapy session. Their life interacts when they buy the same book titled Sufle in the same day in 3 different cities. I gave this book 7 out of 10 because I really enjoyed the writing style of Aslı Berker, and I will read more books from her whom I can identify with, because her background seems to be very close to me, as well as being very close in age. I like her attention to details, and in this book, the details in the stories affected me much more than the general story itself. Not being a fan of cooking in general, I could not get the satisfaction of reading about food like some of the reviewers in Goodreads did. Among the 3 stories, I loved the Paris story, Mark's story. It was incredibly sweet. I really did like Ferda's story. Some of the things felt very relatable because, of course, that section was taking place in Turkey. Although Lilia's story was interesting at first, it did not have enough developments to catch up with the other 2 stories, in my opinion. Especially towards the middle of the book, it fell into a very repetitive cycle. The ending redeemed it a bit, but it was also the story that I connected the least with. And I gave Sufle by Aslı Berker a 7 out of 10. I'm glad that I discovered Aslı Berker. Today is the 17th of July and I finished the play which was on my TBR on June for Books of Alfred Hitchcock Project, Juno and the Paycock by Kesey. This play was adapted into a movie titled the same, the Juno and the Paycock, a silent movie. And I will mention more about comparison with the play and the movie in my special video, which I will cover 3 of his movies. This play is written by a very famous Irish dramatist in 1924. This play has been produced for many years all throughout the world. And in this play, an Irish matriarch, Juno Boyles, tries to keep her husband and her children safe from the ongoing conflict in the Ireland during the 1920s. Her husband, Captain Jack Boyle, is a man who has foolish schemes, who prefers to drink instead of finding a job for himself. And their son was injured during the conflict between Ireland and United Kingdom a few years before this play takes place. Juno and her daughter are the ones looking after their family. But one day, a lawyer comes to Boyle's house and says that they have inherited a will from a second cousin of Jack's, and their life, their hopes, and of course the neighborhood's view on the Boyle family changes with these news. I thought this play was more realistic than most of the plays that I read, because the online edition that I read also had a very detailed introduction chapter. I learned many things from the time period and the conflict between Ireland and England from this introduction actually. And I really enjoyed the plot. It was both dramatic and also funny at parts. I enjoy those kinds of plays much more than very dramatic or very ha-ha funny plays. I also thought the characters were quite complex, with the exception of a few characters. And lastly, although the play had a very clear political agenda, I liked the fact that it showed the very bad effects of violence and conflict on the people's psychology. So overall, I gave Juno and the Paycock a 7 out of 10. Today is the 21st of July, and I finished the book that I was rereading for Jane Austen July, Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. For the past 3 years, I've chose a theme for Jane Austen July, and this year's theme was Mansfield Park. In this book, Fanny Price is the eldest daughter of a poor family with rich relations. Fanny's aunt, Mrs. Norris, and Lady Bertram decide to help their sister, who also has 7 more children, and bring Fanny to their home and give her shelter, food, and education. In the beginning of the book, Fanny is very sad to leave her home, and especially her older brother, whom she loves very dearly. And her reception in the house is lukewarm at best, and her biggest ally while settling to Mansfield Park is her cousin Edmund. And Fanny grows up and becomes more part of the Bertram family, especially the companion of Lady Bertram. When Fanny turns 18, the lives of the family completely changes with the arrival of a new person, his younger wife, and the Crawfords. When I read the book about, I think 12 or 13 years ago, I originally gave it 2 stars, which is equivalent to, of course, 4 out of 10. I remember being very disappointed and very bored while reading the book. Moreover, I found the character of Fanny very unlikable. When I read my Goodreads review from that time, I wrote that Fanny was critical of everything, everybody, and she complained a lot, but did nothing to change this situation. I remember being very disappointed in the romance. That was the time when I mostly read romance books. I was very curious what I would think about it when I reread this book. First of all, I have to say I really didn't change my mind much about Fanny. I found her too opinionated for my taste, and her very high morals actually made her quite boring. I felt like that she was not the heroine of the story up until the last 100 pages of the book, when she resisted Harry Crawford's charm. And about the romance, I have to say I liked the character of Edmund much better this time. He also was a bit opinionated, but not as much as Fanny. My feelings about the romance did not change because I think Edmund and Fanny did not have a romance story. Just a comradeship story. Their relationship, I think, was perfect as friends and cousins. I have a sort of conflicting opinion about Henry Crawford. I think Henry and Fanny would have made a great couple if Henry had been consistent and determined in his pursuit of true love. But he did not. On the other hand, the family's pressure to Fanny about marrying Henry was hard to take at some scenes because they wanted to pressure her by using her gratitude and making her feel guilty. For that reason alone, I did not want Fanny to accept Henry's charm. So like I said before, my feelings about Henry are very complicated. It's actually the same with his sister. Like Fanny is not a very distinctive heroine. I think Mary Crawford is also not a very distinctive antagonistic rival. And although it made the characters much more complex and story more believable, I found it a little bit hard to engage because of not feeling connected or actually disliking any of the characters. The hints about the society and the role of man and woman in this society was interesting to read, and I think this book had more complex side characters than any of the Jane Austen books. After rereading Mansfield Park, I liked the book better this time, and I gave Mansfield Park by Jane Austen a 7 out of 10. But like I said before, because I felt annoyed with the heroine and a bit with the hero, and could not find any antagonist in the story, its place for my least favorite Jane Austen novel remains the same. Today is the 23rd of July, and yesterday I DNF'd a book that I thought I never would DNF. One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest by Kesey. I previously watched the movie adaptation of this book, and I have to say I loved that adaptation. When this book was the July book for Killer Reads book club, which I try to participate as much as I can, I was very much pleased that I would finally read this book. When I started reading the book, I found out that I could not concentrate at all, and I really didn't like the writing style too. Although the characters and the plot seemed interesting, I realized that I'm just skimming the text without really comprehending the impact or the emotional density of the plot. And I actually started another book to find out if I was going through a reading slump. But when I found out after 15 minutes that I was quite into the book that I started reading, I figured that the problem for me was the book. I know that many of the people in the book club thought that this was a very engaging book. Certainly I'm in the minority, so please do not give up on the book based on my personal antipathy for the writing style of the author. Hello Bookish friends, today is the 25th of July and I finished my last book that I was reading for Jane Austen July, Edmund Bertram's Diary by Amanda Grange. This book is a retelling of Mansfield Park, which is written from the point of view of Edmund Bertram, and as can be understood from the title, it consists of diary entries of Edmund during the time period that the Mansfield Park takes place. First of all, I will say that this retelling was a completely faithful retelling of Mansfield Park. On the other hand, it was for that reason that I didn't really enjoy reading this book. Almost nothing new was added from Edmund's point of view. I know it is hard to create a different narrative for Edmund since he's in most of the scenes in the book, and he's certainly the least mysterious hero of Jane Austen. But the dialogues were taken directly from the book, as the repetition of the Mansfield Park that I've read very recently. The only sections that were added telling Edmund's education time in Eton and his relationship with his brother Tom. And there were some bits added in the end of the book too. But I think they consisted about only 5% of the book. Because of that reason, I skim read most of the sections. Actually, I finished the book in 2 days, and I was very disappointed in this book because the other 4 books that I read from Amanda Grange belonging to this series were creative and added so much more from the hero's point of view. Especially the book Captain Wentworth's Diary added a period Frederick first met Anne. It's hard to believe that the author who wrote such creative narratives could have written this very unoriginal book. So overall, like I've said before, it was a very disappointing book, and I gave Edmund's Bertram's Diary by Amanda Grange 5 out of 10. Today is the 26th of July, and I finished my audiobook that I was listening for a while, Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo. I also read this book for my booktuber's recommendation project. For July TBR, I picked April at Getting Higgy With It name from my tall glass, and watched her best of 2021 books video, and chose Mr. Loverman from that video because it was already on my audiobook TBR. In this book, Barry is a man over 70 who has immigrated from Antigua and has been married for about 50 years with 2 daughters and 1 grandson. Barry has been in love with his best friend Morris, and they had been lovers since they were students when they first met in high school. His wife's father dies, and his wife goes to Antigua to attend the funeral. And Barry makes a decision that when she comes back, she will tell her that she wants to divorce her and live with Morris from now on. From that decision, we follow the events that happened both in the past as well as in the current timeline, mostly from Barry's point of view. And some sections are actually from the point of view of his wife, Carmel. In general, I really did like this book, and I found Evaristo's writing style very approachable. It wasn't simple, but it was not flowery or trying to teach us some things with very pretty sentences. Instead, I really did like that she used very sincere sentences. I was not a big fan of Barry in most of the scenes. Even though he was a closeted gay, he had many prejudices towards people who did not live like he did. Because of this very sincere point of view, I really enjoyed listening to this audiobook and being surprised at some of the things that he says. But what made this book so powerful was the few chapters from Carmel's point of view. It really showed the other side of the coin, a wife who's unsure why she cannot attract her husband, how living a life can ruin the lives of many people who are affected by that lie. Overall, I'm very glad that I listened to this book. I will read more books from this author, and I gave Mr. Loverman by Bernardine Evaristo an 8 out of 10. Today is the 27th of July, And I finished another stage play that I am reading for my Books of Alfred Hitchcock project, The Skin Game by John Galsworthy. In this stage play, two quite rich families living in the English countryside do have a conflict over a piece of land. One family comes from old money, much more bound to old traditions and old relationships, whereas the second family comes from new money and think that everything is fair game when it comes to acquiring land. When this conflict rises much more and they decide to make this a skin game, which means they would do anything in their power to prevent the other one from acquiring this land. And this conflict leads to the disintegration of friendships between the family members, as well as trying to dig out a secret path of a daughter-in-law. Although this stage play had the main elements of a classical tragedy, I really did like the modern take on the story by the author. I really did like John Galsworthy's writing style, and I would really like to try the famous work written by him, The Horse-Style Saga. I'm sure I'm pronouncing the name incorrect, but it's out of my power to pronounce it right now. For the plot of the play, I really did like the more human approach and the harsh criticism of people being ruthless just for a piece of land or just for revenge. In summary, I thought this was a very decent stage play, and if one day they stage it on my local theater, I really would like to see that play. And I gave The Skin Game by John Galsworthy an 8 out of 10. So those were the 6 works that I finished in the second half of July. Please comment down below, have you read any of the works that I mentioned in this video? I especially would like to know your thoughts about Mansfield Park. Are you annoyed with Fanny as much as I am? And if you're a new viewer, first of all, welcome. Please like and subscribe. Hope to see you very soon. Bye. As for Turkish Word of the Day, since my favorite book that I read in the second half of July was Mr. Loverman, I thought lover should be the word of the day. Lover means aşık in Turkish, and aşık is our Turkish word of the day. Have a good day.